Matthew, welcome back.
Very good to see you. Nice to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to catching up with you. So it's been a while since we had a proper conversation, and as we were just, I had some things obviously going on, but you had some big things going on as well. So if I'm not mistaken, you maybe let me just do a very quick intro of you and then feel free to correct me, but I think
Great.
most people know you. No, I think primarily you're an investor, but most people probably know you because as a founder of or a co-founder of Nine Others, which is this dinner that I always recommend to all the founders I know, because I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think it's the best event for founders that you can go to in the UK, and not just in the UK, worldwide. But you guys have hosted now, is it thousands of dinners, or at least over 1,000 dinners?
We've
With
done many, many hundred. Yes, I don't think we've hit thousands of dinners quite yet, actually.
thousands of
Um,
guests. That's what
but
it is.
thousands of
Thousands of
guests.
guests.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like at least 5,000 people have been to a meal with Nine Others. Which, yeah, I started that in 2011 with Katie. Um, and yeah, I guess that's the kind of public facing bit, really. That's the bit perhaps people are more familiar with. But it's very, very simple. But because we've been doing it so long, people seem to like it. But we do it because people like it and we like it. So it's great that you recommend it. Thank you.
I always do. So I'm sure that a few people already came to your events through me. And I think you had a few exits happen since the last time we spoke. So you were last time you were on the podcast was probably close to 2 years ago, or like 1.5 years ago, probably. And some of your investments had an exit. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. So I think we spoke last on the podcast. It was, it was right in amongst COVID. I think it was
Yeah.
one of the early ones that I remember doing in COVID, which was a big change for all of us, obviously. And then since then, yeah, in 2022, I started getting some exits. Um, I've had four in total now, which have been great. And it's like as an investor, which we might get into, the failures sometimes happen quite quickly, and even the successes, not much happens very quickly. So you're kind of thinking for a long time, sometimes for years, you kind of wondering whether you're any good at this kind of thing. And then you keep going, and actually that's when the exits happen. So I'd been doing it for quite a number of years, and then just had my first exit in 2022. And then a few happened quite quickly, so it was fantastic. It's been really, really good.
The patience that's required for that, it's incredible and admirable because yeah, I mean that's the nature of investing, right? You what's the average time actually that it takes for a company to exit? Is it 7 years or is it more? 7 years is
Oh,
kind of
I
number
don't
that I
know.
hear being thrown around.
I mean, 7 years is probably pretty quick.
Mm,
Actually, well, certainly since the beginning of the company. So my best exit, actually, it was about let me see, it was probably about 8 years, but that was since the very, very beginning of the company. Some investors obviously invest not right at the beginning, but they may invest in the seed stage or various seed stages, and then by the time it gets to exit, yeah, it can take many, many years. But certainly from beginning to end, it's a long time, but it's extremely quick if it happens in 7 or 8 years,
mm,
actually. And it's quite good because, I mean, look, I've had fantastic exits, but if you think of some of the mega exits, especially in the last few years when companies have been staying private for longer, actually, if they're working, they seem to remain private for longer.
uh-huh.
So again, it's more of the patience game, and if it can be frustrating, but if these companies just keep going because they're working, then actually they stay private a bit longer. So you might have to wait a little bit longer for your exit, but when it does happen, it can be more meaningful.
Nice. So yeah, maybe share a little bit. How was it when you finally get those first exits? And it's obviously, I mean, I can probably relate relate. I've never had a proper exit, right? But can probably relate a little bit more to the founder side of that. Obviously, you work on that for a really long time, and then you get that massive payoff and achieve that success that you've been working towards. And for an investor, it's different but similar, right? It's something that you had to pick have to make the right pick, the right choices, and then years later, as years of waiting, and you don't
Mm.
know. Sometimes it's going well,
Yeah,
sometimes probably not going so well.
it's funny. I mean, it's a number of things, right? I mean, first and foremost, I mean, I'm a minor investor, right? So I'm a small part of the investment group in these companies, and the founders are and should be. They should have the lion's share of any exit, and it's just brilliant to see, as you said, to see that hard work pay off, because the founders are working for years and years. They've got the most at risk. They've got the most to lose and to gain, and it's wonderful to see the hard work pay off. And as an investor, yeah, you kind of hope that you make the right decisions at the time, knowing that lots of companies can fail, and a lot do. But it's certainly, yeah, going through these and having a few exits. I think it certainly has given me a bit of confidence in terms of what I've learned over the years, and it's always refining, but it's given me a bit of confidence in the evaluation of founders, and being able to recognize some of the patterns and such like, um, which I'll always keep refining, but always keep with me from the ones I've had. But then you learn from the failures as well. Like there was one, and it was going to be a huge success for us as investors and success for the founder. Um, but then it failed. It all fell over, kind of in the last minute. So the other thing to learn is it's never done till you've got the money in the bank. Uh,
Mm.
so it's lots of lessons.
Yeah, that's why I hear very often that even when you get those fears, if you're a founder, right, and you're looking at a potential exit, somebody reaches out to you, and they're looking at acquiring you. There's still, and even when the diligence starts, so things are getting kind of serious. There's
Mm.
still probably like 50% or even more than 50% chance that the whole thing's just going to fail for whatever number of reasons, right?
Yeah, well, it's like any funding round, right? You get funding, and
Mm,
some founders, the poorer founders, think, okay, great, we've made it, but there are always challenges. You're always constrained in one way or another. You've always got to work hard. It's always going to be stressful, um, and yeah, you treat the M&A process like that as well. And I think I think too many founders um, could have better exits if they thought about it differently. And maybe it's not gone through enough. I mean, I'm not deeply involved because I invest at the early stages, but still learn a lot through these companies having the exits, and how the founders run the process and how the founders operate and think about their exit, has a huge impact. And even especially at that later stage and at the exit stage, you've got to still remember that incentives matter. And um, people buying companies want to pay as little as possible and get all the value, and people selling companies want to get as much money as possible, and that's not really aligned. So it's how the founder manages through that process that's really important. And hard work, really hard work.
mm. Yeah, we've had a few stories, I think, that we shared before on the podcast with founders who had exits, and yeah, it's a journey, right? It's probably, it's one thing that you're the most looking forward to, but at the same time it becomes one of the most stressful parts of the journey, I think, because there's so much
Yeah,
of that extra work that you need to do, and again, that constant uncertainty: is this even going to happen? Is it not going to
yeah,
happen? Is it going to be good or not? So
yeah.
it's
And you've got to run the business in the meantime, right? So when you're going
exactly,
through that
yeah.
process, you're going through diligence and all the rest of it. You've still got to be running the business well.
And you usually don't really want to share it too much yet, because you don't know if it's all going to happen, what's going to be reaction
Yeah,
from the employees, and so on. So
yeah.
yeah,
Um,
well, then you had obviously another big thing that happened over the last few months, which is you wrote your first book. So congrats.
thank you. Yeah, you're right. The first, so there will be more. That's a
I
good one.
hope so.
Yeah, yeah, we did. Katie and I finally got ourselves together and wrote a book about nine others, which has been very well received, and it was a great thing to do, great thing to go through, and it's been fantastic. Loved it.
I saw. in the book that somebody described Nine Others as group therapy for founders, and I think that's a pretty creative but accurate description, right? So maybe, well, actually, for those who might be listening and who don't know what Nine Others is, how do you describe it? All right, before we continue, I want to take a second to talk about our sponsor. I've always been saying that one of the best ways to learn about business is by working closely with a smart and successful entrepreneur, and this might be your opportunity. Our sponsor is a company called Judge Me. Judge Me is a Shopify product review plugin, and they're the number one plugin on Shopify. They're literally, if you look at the Shopify App Store, they're in the first spot. They're bootstrapped, and they managed to outcompete other companies that raised hundreds of millions of dollars by just being smarter and building a better product. They were started by PJ, who was also a guest on the Founders Lounge, episode 54, so I recommend you to check it out. They recently moved their headquarters to London, and they're looking for smart people to join them. They're looking for product managers, engineers, and they're looking to fill other roles as well. So check out careers.judge.me and see if you find any role that you like and apply. So that's careers.judge.me. Now, enjoy the rest of the episode.
Well, it's very, very simple, and yeah, I guess group therapy for founders is an accurate description that someone gave it in the early days. So it's called Nine Others because it is oneself and nine others. So it is a small group. So it's only ever 10 people, oneself and nine others, and we organize a dinner, so a very simple meal, and the people who are there are founders, entrepreneurs, people working in startups, and the whole point is to help solve some business challenges. So for each person at the table, they have to share what's keeping them up at night, what their challenge is, and these are ordinary, everyday business of business challenges that founders face over the years. But what we realized before we started Nine Others was there are very few places, if any, that the founders get to talk about these challenges. So Katie and I were working with founders and startups in the funding world and realized that a lot of these people have the same challenge as each other, but they don't get to talk about it because at every other networking event and in most other situations, they're selling, right? They're getting
Mm,
investment, so they're pitching, they're trying to get customers or users, or they're trying to attract talent. So in all these other situations, they're in sales mode, so they feel like everything has to be brilliant, but they've got the challenges of business about hiring people, about maybe firing people, about money, raising money, getting money, chasing invoices, money going in, money going out. And so Katie and I thought, okay, is there something we can do for these founders to try and have other founders help solve those challenges? So that was kind of the origins of Nine Others, and it's so simple and it's not really changed. So every person that comes along shares what's keeping them up at night, and then we spend 10-15 minutes kicking around that problem, to see if the group can help out. And it's often not about finding one magic answer. It's about helping that person think and then helping them make a step forward. And it's as simple as that. There's no hierarchy. You're not going to come and find the answer from someone who's been there and done everything. But in discussing the challenge and in listening to, I think importantly, listening to what questions that other people ask, then you can help take a step forward, and just make a decision and do something. You have to act, and it might not be the best answer. It might not be the perfect answer, but it'll get you towards that.
mm.
And that's kind of the mission behind Nine Others.
One thing that I always mention about the event as well is, so as you said, you're not in a pitching mode, right? So you can actually share your struggles. Everyone understands you. The whole purpose is that you can share what the problem is.
Yeah.
And it's also not a typical, far from being a typical networking event, right? It's not somewhere where you just go there and exchange business cards. It's actually, you actually get to know each other on a very intimate way, in a very intimate setting. You're there, everyone gets their 15 minutes to talk, and you take so much out of those conversations. It's the most um effective, or maybe you should say like productive kind of event that you can do, to solve your business problems, right? Or one of the most kind of productive ways to get feedback on the problems that you're facing at the moment.
Yeah, I think so, and that's good to hear. I think it's, and we say about this in the book, is to be deliberately vulnerable. And I think
Mm,
whether it's at Nine Others or with, with friends, with mentors, with coaches, with other peers, I think it's good to be able to set something up where you can be deliberately vulnerable in the right
mhm,
environment. And at Nine Others, it's Chatham House rules, so you share what you're comfortable sharing. People respect that. There's that confidentiality that we have, and people respect it. And yeah, people share all sorts of challenges. Um, from the minor everyday stuff to the big, existential. Should I continue with my business? Should I continue with my co-founder? Should I fire this early employee? All of these sorts of things we've had over the years, and it's pleases myself and Katie that people want to open up and share those things, and we're grateful that people do that, and we've created an environment where they can, and they get other people's perspectives. And these are
mhm.
all pretty much early stage founders around the table. So like I say, you're not going to hear from someone who's been there and done it several times and has the answer. You're going to be around the table with other people who are in amongst those challenges themselves, and I think that's the best place to discuss them, because somebody else around the table that you probably never heard of or never met before, might have faced a similar challenge to that a few months ago,
Yeah.
or maybe in amongst it, as they are too. So yeah, it's been super.
Yeah, that was exactly my experience whenever I came to the dinner as well. That whatever the question is, you'll get at least three, four, five people who will provide some kind of answer for you. And so, yeah, this happened to me, or yeah, this is how we solved it, or I know this one person who had the same problem,
Mm.
and I can introduce you after. And then, well, obviously, you and Katie, you've been to hundreds of these events now, and you guys have a lot. You've acquired a lot of wisdom through that as well. So,
Well, that's just
and
it.
you'll,
We thought at the beginning, is this going to go anywhere? Are people going to like it? So we did one, and then it was well received. So we did another, and we thought, well, at the very, very worst, we're going to have dinner with a bunch of interesting people, and we
exactly.
might learn some stuff. So that has definitely happened. But we have our challenges as well, and it's been fantastic to do this over the years and connect with some incredible people doing some incredible things. And yeah, we've certainly learned the most. It's been
So
super.
that's a pretty good side effect of doing these events.
Mm.
And so now in the book, you've kind of gathered some of that knowledge, and you go through 10 questions, right? 10 questions that every founder should ask themselves, preferably as early as possible into their journey, I would say. And I think I would describe the book as a blend of business advice and personal growth through introspection primarily. Would you say that that's accurate?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We have 10 questions that we think founders should ask themselves, and some of those are more personal, about yourself as a human. Why you're doing what you're doing. Why am I doing this in the first place, kind of thing. And then, so that's kind of more of the personal development stuff, the kind of reflection about yourself. And then others are more business focused, about putting yourself out there, and how to think about starting, growing, scaling a company. And someone recently described it as a bunch of stories and essays from Nine Others, and it's kind of short stories. I suppose, like each chapter is a bit of a long essay on examples we've seen around those questions,
Mm.
and anecdotes from people who've been to Nine Others as well.
Hmm. I'd love to go through some of those questions and discuss a little bit, and then everyone who's listening to. So for me, it was certainly interesting to go through the book and ask those questions at the back of my mind. A lot of which are yeah questions that they cross your mind sooner or later, and yeah, the sooner you answer them, the better it probably is. But I'd love to go through some of them with you today. Probably not all of them, Everyone who's interested going through all of them, obviously you should order the book. It's really good, and it's really shares has a lot of good knowledge, good wisdom in it, and a lot of good stories, as you said as well. Um,
Yeah, great. No, happy to talk through anything, and from my perspective, or from some of the stories we've come across through Nine Others as well.
nice. So obviously, you start. I think you took the lessons from Simon Sinek, and you start with why, right? One of the first questions you should ask yourself is, why am I doing this anyway? Which is an interesting one, because I think that's ultimately the driver of a lot of what you do, or maybe everything you do in life, and in business. So you need that why for yourself as a person, but you also need that why for the business, right? I think those can be the same, but they can also be different, right? What's the broader why that you share with the employees and with your co-founders and with the world, and maybe what's your personal why?
Mm.
And I think it's an interesting question, because a lot of, I think the why, and I'm wondering actually if you agree with this, but I think it very often starts with the money, but I think it usually doesn't end with the money. I think very often when you look at business, people often start a business because they're like, well, I want to have that financial freedom or wealth or whatever it might be, or maybe I want to buy a Ferrari or whatever it is. And then I'm sure it sometimes continues like that, but very often I see that that doesn't become the main why anymore. It's
Hmm.
something that gets you in, but it's not something that keeps you going for decades, right? Again, maybe sometimes yes, but very often it's not necessarily the ultimate driver.
I mean, money's important. We all want it. We all focused on it. We've got to have it to survive and thrive. Um, but it shouldn't be the focus if you're going to start a startup. And the reason is there are probably better ways to get rich than starting a startup. There are very, very smart people starting companies. They could get extremely well paid jobs and live very, very comfortable lives. But I think there has to be a stronger why behind doing the business, because if you're going to start a startup, I often say, like, the guaranteed result is it's going to get really, really difficult. It's going to get so hard, and you're going to probably be, I mean, you're forever resource constrained, but especially in the early days, you're probably not going to be able to pay yourself very much, if anything.
Yeah.
A lot of businesses start as side hustles, so you have to be motivated by something else. And I've tried a bunch of things in the past. When I was miserable working for software companies in the past, I thought, no, I want to start a business. I want to do something more interesting, more impactful. I want to reap the rewards of my hard work. And I had a bunch of ideas and tried a bunch of things, but for some of them I just wasn't motivated enough. So
Mm,
I wasn't getting out of bed a couple of hours earlier to work on an idea. I had this idea, I thought it was great, but I just wasn't doing it. And then, I was working for an investor, and then working with Katie for a year or so. And then we had the idea for Nine Others. And then it was kind of easy. I got up at 5 a.m. I came into London early. I met Katie at about 7 a.m. and we worked on Nine Others, thinking about it, who to invite, where to have it, what it should be, working on our own why for the business, for, an hour and a half or so before we went to our respective day jobs. So that was kind of the filter for whether I was motivated enough to do that idea. And I think if you focus on money too much too soon, the money doesn't come very quickly. So if you focus on that, you're not going to get it. So then you'll give up. So there has to be something more meaningful behind it.
mm. And then I see very often also people who do make the money. There's always money is like a score a little bit in business as well, right? So if you want to treat business as a game, then
Mm.
the financial success is a bit of a scoreboard that you're chasing.
Hmm.
Um, but at some point, I think a lot of people also realize that it. I think to some extent it does make you happier, but at some point there's just not that much more, I don't know, happiness or material possessions that it brings to you that would make your life that much better. And if nothing else at that point, you perhaps switch to something else. And I think for me, if I speak from my personal experience, obviously, yes, of course, there's a financial motivator that is still strong for me. But I think with every year, the bigger motivator for me is the actual how I grow as a person through
Hmm.
business. And I've talked about that quite a few times already on the podcast, but it's a really important thing to me. It's I to me that's the ultimate thing that I can be doing in my life to just become a better person in many many aspects of my life, right?
Yeah.
And
I think it goes in various phases as well. So, from start to, to going through it, then yeah, start, you've got to, money maybe shouldn't be the main driver, but you've got to have a purpose behind what you're doing. If you, quote unquote, make it and you make a bit of money and you can be financially independent, well, a lot of people get there and they have no purpose anymore. So they're miserable. So, okay, they've got a
yeah.
bit of money, but then they're unhappy. So they have to spend some time, discovering a different purpose. And for some people, I know some extremely wealthy people, in the billionaire territory. And even for them, it must be something beyond money, because if it was just money, they would have given up when they had, 10 million, 20 million, 50 million. They would have
Mm.
packed it in and not done anything. So they must have some greater purpose that then obviously keeps making them more and more money. Um, and I think the other thing to think about, which I thought of when you were speaking there, was and again it goes in phases. But I remember being out for a run a few months ago, and I had a break. I'd run for a few miles and I had a break, and I was walking up through a bit, and I just sort of wondered to myself, which I've wondered quite a bit since, because it's quite a good indicator for me. I said, okay, if I was, multi millionaire, would I be doing anything different right now?
Hmm.
And a lot of the time, thankfully, the answer is no. So if I was sitting here with absolute piles of millions, or if I was on that run with piles of, would I be doing anything different? Well, no, I'd probably still have the same kit on. I'd have the same trainers on. I'd still want to go for a run. And I think that's been a useful question to myself. I'm not
Mm.
as financially independent as I want to be yet, but I still ask the question, if I was absolutely stinking rich, would I be doing anything different right now? And if the answer is yes, this, then okay, maybe you have to work towards that, or that can help you find a different purpose. But it's quite nice to say, actually, no, I wouldn't be doing anything different. Like I've always said, if I absolutely hit the jackpot, or if things go terribly, terribly wrong, I can still do nine others once a month, even though it doesn't generate pots of money, but I enjoy doing it and I think it's got a good purpose behind it. So
Mm.
even if I was a billionaire, I think I'd still host a nine others each month. So that means it's a good thing to do now that I'm, when I'm not a billionaire.
So that's also a good thing for me to hear, because when you will be a billionaire, I want you to still keep doing the nine others events.
Yeah,
Okay. So
yeah, you're always welcome. Definitely. We'll see what book number we're on by then.
we'll see. Well, we'll be waiting. Um, yeah, I remember now when you were talking about it. I think it was Steve Jobs was famous for, or there's this story about him that every morning he would wake up and look at himself in the mirror and say, "If I were to die, what is it? If I were to die in a few days, would I still do what?" No, it was something like that. Yeah, if I were to die in a few days, will I still do what I'm going to do today? Yes. If I were to die in a
Mm.
week, am I still gonna? Would I still do what I'm going to do today? And if the answer was no for a few days in a row, he realized that he have to change something. I do think that's a tricky question though, because
Yeah, I'm not keen on that question.
I, yeah, if because I'm not going to die in 7 days, so I think if I'm going to die in 7 days, it really doesn't matter what I do, right? For the next, like,
Yeah,
as in,
exactly.
I don't need to take care of myself. I don't need to take care of my life. But the reality is that hopefully I'm going to live decades and decades, right?
Yeah.
Which
I
puts
think
things
maybe
in a
there's some middle
different
ground to that
perspective.
question. Maybe there's some middle ground. So it's like, look, I don't know, if you knew you were going to die in 2 years' time, would you, what would you do? And I think
Yeah,
that's quite a different question to say. If you're going to die at the weekend, what would you do?
even 2 years is still pretty short term, right? And
Mm.
there was this famous article that came out years ago about what people said on their deathbeds.
Mm.
And I have the same opinion about that article, to be honest. It's like, well, when you're on deathbed, I don't think you're necessarily having the clearest thoughts. I'm not saying that I have the clearest thoughts. I'm not saying that the way I look at the world right now is the
Yeah,
best, but it, it is a little bit different when you're about to die and you're, well, I wish I would just, spend 24/7 with my family. Like, sure, but
yeah.
there's other
You
stuff you
just
need to
can't.
do in life as well,
Exactly.
too. Yeah.
You just can't. Like, yeah, those questions are always, oh, I should have spent more time with my friends or more time with my family. Well, you have to. I mean, look, should we cancel the call now and go see our families? Well,
Exactly. Yeah.
no, because you've got to, it's a great balance, and that's part of the big challenge of life, right?
Yeah. Good. So, one of the next questions that you talk about in the book is, how do I get more visible? So, that's an interesting one because I actually think for a long time in my career, I didn't actually think about that. Maybe even more so. So, me coming from a more technical background, it's more of a
Mhm.
builder kind of person, right? We need to build it and they will come, which eventually we realize that that's not really how it works in real
Mhm.
life. And it's better if they come first and then you build it. After all, so it's the visibility is often, I came to believe that visibility and distribution is often more important than the actual product or the quality of the product that you do. Not that that's not important, but if you don't have the visibility, the product really doesn't matter because you're not going to sell it and you're not going
Yeah,
to sell yourself as a product if you look at it that way, right?
yeah,
um and I think that's what the chapter is generally about, right? How do you get out there, you as an individual, and I guess how you push your work or your startup out there as well. um and I'm curious, I mean, first, maybe if you have anything to add in general to that, but second, also I'm curious, what are some good examples that you're seeing out there? I think being out there and building a personal brand as a founder, which I think is related to this question, became very popular, especially in the recent years. I didn't
mhm.
see that much 5 years ago, but I see it a lot over the last 2 years, especially.
Yeah. I mean, as with many of these things, there's no one right answer. I think it's a couple of things. So I think you've got to figure out a bit like your why and your purpose. You've got to figure out like what suits you. Um, but I think what even when you're doing that, it takes a lot of experimenting, and you've got to push yourself. And
Mm,
I've had to do this, speaking personally about making myself more visible. It's not really my comfort zone to do a lot of these things. So I've had to work on that. Putting myself out there, putting opinions, thoughts, and such like online, writing, appearing on things like this. Um, I want to be able to do it, but it wasn't completely comfortable. So I think you do have to find a way that works for yourself, but it will involve pushing out of your comfort zone a bit. But that comes through a bit of experimentation. I think, as you're going through that, it's just got to come across as genuine as well. I think we've all seen, I mean, I gave up LinkedIn for a year. I'm back on it now, but I'm kind of questioning it sometimes because a lot of the stuff on there just doesn't seem very genuine.
mm,
It's either written by an assistant or it's in a little group or pods that people call them, and people comment on each other's posts and such like to try and get more clicks and views and whatnot. Um, and I don't really want to play that game because it just comes across as rather rather fake. Um, so I think, yeah, you do have to push yourself. You do have to get out your comfort zone, but it's to find a way that works for yourself. And there are so many different avenues to take. Um, you know, I don't. I'm not on. For example, I'm not on TikTok, right?
hmm
Because maybe it'll work wonderfully for me. A friend of mine suggests that I, could be on there and should be on there, but I just don't. I'm just not there yet. I don't think that's right for me. Um,
we need to
but I
clip this part and put it on TikTok.
Yeah,
So we
go for it. If other people do that,
can-
I'm all right with that. But I don't want to fiddle around with TikTok. But I still like Twitter for all its faults, and I'm
Mhm.
getting back into LinkedIn a bit. To try and uh, try and spread the word a bit about nine others. And again, it comes back to the purpose of it. Like I was off LinkedIn for a year, And then I thought, okay, I'll go back on it. I mean, I'm using it in a different way. I don't have any notifications. I don't get any emails from LinkedIn about comments or connections or anything else. So I have to go into the, into the website to see what's going on. And I do that every now and again. And the purpose behind it is to hopefully is to, you know, spread more of the stories about Nine Others, because I think it's a useful thing, and help some of my portfolio companies. Maybe I'll see something that'll be helpful to them. So it's much less about me promoting a personal brand, and much more about sharing Nine Others, because people might want to come to a dinner, or they might want to buy a book, or they might want to read some of the stories, or I might be able to spot something that's relevant to one of my portfolio companies, and helps them become more successful.
Mm. It's yeah, so the whole being online and sharing or getting out there, it's an interesting topic that I've also
Mm.
talked about on the podcast several times. And actually, the next episode is going to be by with an expert, like a personal branding expert, who focuses specifically on founders. So that's
Yeah.
going to be hopefully an interesting conversation as well.
I
So
mean, I'd be interested to listen to that. And I mean, again, speaking personally, I'm better if I treat things like projects, like mini
uh-huh,
tasks, mini
uh-huh.
projects. Um, and in the second half of last year, I just wasn't writing anything. I've got a Substack, and I try to share some things that I learn about my investing. And I just wasn't sharing anything. I don't know. I just had a bunch of drafts written, but I just hadn't hit publish, and I'm still not quite sure why I wasn't doing that. And maybe it just felt a bit open ended and lacked purpose. Um, but then what I've committed to doing this year is writing one post a week. And I don't
Uh-huh.
know, so all of a sudden that feels like it's got a bit of purpose behind it. It's a bit of a project. It's not open ended. I'm going to have a beginning. So I've done the first one, 1 out of 52. Then I'm going to do 2 out of 52, 3 out of 52. And I don't know, something in my mind, back to my techie days, perhaps just likes that, that little process, sort of ticking off these tasks as I go through that project. So again, look, it's about finding something that works.
And there's a bit of accountability there, right? If you put 3 out of 52, it's like,
Yeah.
well, I got to put out those 52. Otherwise,
Yeah.
that's not going to look good.
Yeah. And I like
I
that as
love
well.
that.
I think that suits
I
my
love that.
character as well. It's like this project, that's what I've committed to. Am I absolutely sure? Yep, let's go for it. And then I
Yeah.
will do it. Last January, I had kind of similar. I committed to writing, every day on a weekday. So every day, 5 days a week
Hmm.
throughout January. And I did that as well. And some of them were very short. And it was like, oh my goodness, I said I'd do this. So here's the post for today. And some of them were much more thought through. Um, but I quite like that. And maybe it's treating it as a game, as a project, as things to tick off, and then you've, I don't know, completed the level, so to speak. That's been very useful for me about trying to get more visible.
Hmm. Hmm. Good. Next question is one of my probably favorite ones. What do I do with my gut reactions? Why is that my favorite one? I think because I am probably the most confused about this one. So when you're confused about something, it's always good to talk about it, at least, or think about it, or write
Mhm.
about it, or whatever. But just get it out of your mind, or brainstorm a little bit about it. So this is an interesting question for me because, again, I'll just share a bit of a personal story first. I am a very analytical person, right? So
Mhm.
my life is everything has a list, everything has a spreadsheet, everything has a score. And when there's a big decision that needs to be made, there's a score, there's a pros and cons, there's a SWOT analysis, whatever is required, right? There's some kind of heavy thinking process that's very analytical. And I'll never forget, I had a conversation with a good friend of mine, who's a pretty good psychologist, and that's years ago, maybe a decade ago, I don't know. And she's completely different than I am. I'm very analytical, she's much more intuitive. And she said, yeah, I mean, that all sounds good, that you make you think it through and you make all these lists and you write it down, but you're also assuming that you're really freaking smart and you actually think of that you consciously think of all the possible scenarios. And the way she thought about it,
That's
she
a good
said,
challenge to
I
you.
I actually think that my subconscious brain is way more powerful and just thinks of all those weird scenarios that I would never consider, and that's what my gut is telling me to do. I was like,
Mhm.
huh, well, that's interesting. That's just not how I function. I function very differently. But I've been thinking about that ever since, and I wouldn't say that I've changed drastically. I think I'm still a fairly analytical person who likes to make those lists and spreadsheets. And that helps me make sense of stuff and helps me make sense of my
Yeah.
decisions. Um, but yeah, and I have one funny story as well of when I actually understood my gut really well. So it was a few years ago, and I just left my previous startup and I got a job. I moved to London. I got a job in London, and I quite liked my job. I thought it was really good. I thought I'm gonna learn a lot, and but there was always that itch, right? I need to start something else. I need to start a new business, and that was my big decision in my mind. It's like, what should I do? Should I do like just 50-50? What's the right thing to do here?
Mm.
And somebody shared on Twitter that they are really good at giving career advice and they just have some free time, and if you want career advice you can just message them and they'll give you a reply. And that person, and I messaged them. I didn't know them. I messaged them. I tell them, look, here's my situation. I'm not sure what should I do. Should I like just go all in on the job, or should I do something on the side? How would you approach this? And he said, look, it's better to go all in on whatever you're doing. And he gave some kind of explanation why that's generally a better thing to do. And I didn't like his answer, and that
Mm.
was my answer because I didn't like it. I was like, so probably I shouldn't go all in on the job because
Mm.
he gave me his advice. I didn't like the advice. So what was the right thing for me was actually the opposite of what he recommended, right?
Yeah.
And that was all I needed. I got my answer, and that's in a way how I would say that was when I listened to my gut, right? I didn't listen to his advice, but my feelings about his advice gave me the answer.
And you probably, in the
So
moment,
just
you probably didn't know why you didn't like his answer.
I didn't know, but I just realized later. I was like, yeah, I don't like that, so I'm not gonna do that.
And that's the good thing, right? And I think you're look, if you're more an analytical person and you've got everything in a spreadsheet and you score everything, then that's fine. But I'm pleased to hear that you do leave a bit of room for your gut to listen out to that. And maybe that conversation with that careers person is an example of you kind of got to force yourself into those positions sometimes. So kind of push yourself or prompt yourself into a situation where somebody will give an extreme view that you might disagree with, only kind of engineer that, but only for the outcome of you being able to immediately sort of sense, no, that's not right, or yes,
Mm,
this is completely right. And I think the interesting thing with your with gut decisions is, whether you kind of intuitively think it's right or think it's wrong, you're probably right. However, it does take time and it takes a bit of reflection, and sometimes, you know, an hour or two. Sometimes, if it's me, it's out on a run or it's a day or two later. And I feel this sometimes when, if I'm a bit anxious or a bit stressed or whatever, you kind of analytically think, oh, well, am I stressed because of this, because of this, because of this? And it's like, oh, you kind of tick those things off, or those things, happen and you're still a bit stressed. And then something will happen and it's like, that's what it was. And I think that's it. I think that's with your gut decision, or some things that are in the subconscious. It can take time and reflection to kind of be able to articulate exactly what that is, exactly what
mm.
that's speaking to you from. So I think it's definitely worth leaving some space to listen to your gut, but realizing that actually you might not be able to articulate what it's saying for a bit of time until afterwards.
Yeah,
And this
yeah. What I'm
was,
thinking,
we saw this a couple of, I mean, there's a couple of examples from Nine Others.
I would love to
Um,
hear some examples. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, in general, and especially in the early days, and still now, a lot of the time, we meet everybody before they come to a Nine Others dinner. Um, And in the early days, it was quite straightforward because there's 10 people at the dinner. Katie's one of them. I'm one of them. So we need to fill the rest up. So there's kind of 8 people we need to find to fill the seats. And we were meeting lots of startups anyway. And we always, right from the beginning, we had this sense that actually we want people to share a challenge and to help the group. And um, so we wanted to kind of sense check that someone was going to come along and contribute before they got an invite, because it'd be pretty hopeless if we went to a dinner and everyone was there just to, pick up business cards and be completely transactional about what they could take out of it. So we would meet people, and if we got a sense that this person was there for what they could take out of it rather than what they could contribute, we'd not mention nine others. We'd talk about the day job stuff, which was probably why we had the meeting in the first place. And yeah, after doing nine others quite early, maybe 2 or 3 months, and I met someone, and I just couldn't figure out why I thought they wouldn't be right for nine others.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to Katie about it, and I was, it was going back and forth and back and forth, in one of our 7 a.m. Coffee meetings, and I was like, oh, this person just wasn't right, and I didn't know how to say about it or not say about it, and I landed on that, and it sounds very. I don't know. I don't want to sound like an idiot, but the phrase I used was they just hadn't earned it yet. And it was
Mm-hmm.
like, that might be it, right? They may be, I'm sure they're a wonderful person. I don't wish them any ill or anything like that. But they hadn't kind of, not that we were a few months in, but they hadn't kind of earned the right to come to nine others because they were just so obviously transactional and there for what they can take out of it. And once I
Mm-hmm.
landed on that phrase of they hadn't earned it yet, it was a case of, okay, so they're just not in the right place right now, and maybe they will be in the future, or maybe they will be, you know, when we meet them again, and that was really really useful. But that was a clear example I can remember of something in my gut saying something wasn't quite right, but it took a while and it took a discussion with Katie to kind of put that into words. And then from then we had that kind of category for people who were just there for what they can take out of it. And it's like, look, they're great and everything. They're nice people doing nice things, but they haven't kind of earned the right to come, and because they're not a giver, they're not contributing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one clear thing. And then the other thing, and this may be back to being comfortable, being visible. I remember um, there was a hard hitting, shall we say, journalist around the startup scene in sort of 2011, 2012, and used to do hit jobs on people. And I mean, some of them were fine and deserved to be, but some of them were a bit vindictive and a bit nasty. And I was really worried, as we were getting a little bit more visible with nine others. What if this journalist guy gets a hold of it and like criticizes it and rips it to shreds and says it's a terrible idea? Um, but then after a couple of more months, I sort of have had a word with myself, and it got to the point where it was like, I don't care. They can do whatever they want, but I'm so comfortable with the purpose behind it, what we're doing, why we're doing it, why it's right for some people and not right for other people. All of that worry about somebody doing a hit job on it because they didn't like the idea just disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that was more of a gut feeling after doing this for a certain number of months. Like, okay, this is it's a good thing, and there are always going to be critics, and they can knock it as much as they want. But I know it's the right thing to do, and I'm happy with that. But again, that took a bit of time to get comfortable with.
Do you think that gut feeling is something that you also evolve and become better at over time? So in some
Oh,
ways,
definitely.
definitely. I'm curious if you can share anything more about that. They definitely say that, and I've obviously seen that in decision making, right? Decision
Mm,
making, the I don't know who said that, but one of the best ways to become a better decision maker is to simply make more decisions, because you are like, it's like you're flexing that muscle, and
yeah.
you are and you get hurt when you make a mistake, right? And you
Mm,
learn from that. That's how we
mm,
learn. And you get rewarded when you make the right decision, right? And
mm.
that's how you become a better decision maker in general. And obviously gut feeling is a part of that. And I think one thing I used to be, and I probably still am confused about, is sometimes I don't want to do something, and is there gut I'll call it gut feeling, but I don't think that's right. That's the right way to call it. There's this gut feeling that I shouldn't do something, but it's actually just because it's awkward. It's I'm afraid of it, and
Okay.
it's actually the right thing to do. So that's the, it's easy to confuse those two things. Feeling like
Yeah.
something is, like your gut telling you that this is not the right decision, but it shouldn't be because you're afraid of it, or it shouldn't be because it's awkward, right?
Um, yes, I mean, I think I'd agree with that. You're right; they are different things. It'll be quite interesting to explore the differences and how you can mainly how you can recognize that. Um, I think again back to our visibility chat. You've got to do what's right for you, um, but it will take a bit of experimentation and a bit of getting out your comfort zone.
Mm,
So maybe that could be helpful. I think getting better at decision making is yeah something you can do with practice. I think I've certainly become better at that and like refined that. Your gut your gut decision is kind of down to your intuition, and I think
yeah.
the more you can practice something, like my gut decision or my intuition, or what I'm trying to get some intuition to base decisions from, um, is with the investment stuff. So, and I think my intuition and gut feeling has got a lot better over time from doing nine others. But that's just having exposure to hundreds of different dinners, thousands of different entrepreneurs,
Mm,
and therefore thousands of different challenges, and many more thousands of answers, tips, questions, pushbacks, on those challenges. And I think if you've got so much exposure to that kind of thing, you can't help but improve your intuition about it.
yeah. Yeah.
But you're right. The part where you're maybe you maybe need a bit of courage is different from the gut decision telling you it's not right. Your gut decision in those situations probably tells you, yeah, you should do that, but it's
Mm,
scary.
exactly.
And I think that's the interesting thing. Sometimes we faced at nine others as well. Some people will come along and you'll say, okay, so what's keeping you up at night? And they'll share a challenge. And I don't know, you kick it around a bit, and it's like, that's a bit of a mask for something behind that you're
Mm,
not willing to face. And although that's quite an uncomfortable conversation around the dinner table, sometimes in front of strangers, it's the most valuable thing because, I don't know, some people have a challenge with, XYZ in business. And, okay, that seems fairly superficial. And we discuss that. But then, you just sense that there's something deeper. And there often is, there always is. And it could be, you know, a challenge with normally it's with another person, so they're not getting on with their
mm,
co-founder,
mm,
or they're having a challenge on a particular business area, but it's because of the employee in that area, and maybe that person needs to up their game or get out. So often, yeah, those things where your gut is telling you, you've got a point in this direction, here's where here's where the challenge is. It can be frightening, but that's still the right thing to pursue. But it does take a bit of courage.
mm. Well, maybe if it's a big decision, then going with the kind of five whys approach is also a good way to go, right? Where you
Yeah, perfect.
ask yourself why five times and just try to go deeper, deeper, deeper. With each
Yeah,
why, you go one level deeper. What's really behind it? And then they
yeah,
say, some people say five, some people say seven, but after five whys, you tend to get to the real root reason, right?
yeah,
Why you think that you shouldn't be doing something.
yeah. And it can
I've
take a
got
long time. I mean, it has with me as well. Sometimes, you think you should be doing something because a lot of smart people are giving you the same advice, but
mm,
you're still not making progress on it. So there's something behind there that's stopping you do it, even though all these smart people are saying to do it.
yeah,
That can
yeah.
take a bit of courage to kind of push back and really, to your point, think why a number of times.
Yeah, and probably really just be conscious of that. That fear is a factor, and just over time get better at recognizing that fear aspect of it,
Mm,
right? And say, well, no, I'm just afraid. It's not actually.
mm,
It's not my gut telling me it's a wrong decision. It's just my fear kind of kicking in.
mm.
Um, then we have, well, the ultimate question in a way, or not. What does it take to succeed? That's what we are all wondering. Um, I think you make a big point that discipline is really important, right?
Yeah, discipline's huge. I think of all the points in the questions and in the chapters that we ask in the book, I think one of the one that can really help solve most of the others is discipline. And I think, as we've touched on with other things, I think that is a muscle that you can exercise, you can flex, and you can get
Mm,
better at,
yeah,
in all sorts of areas. So I think if you have discipline in one or two areas, it helps with decision making and discipline in other areas. Um,
yeah.
and there are lots of examples on that. But I think, yeah, I think discipline is really, really key. I mean, again, speaking personally, I've got a couple of things, and again, with discipline, like it's often it's not 100% thing, but I think if you can really push yourself to a higher standard in certain areas, then then that's going to lead to being successful. And I have this thing about doing meetings, right? There's no such thing as on time. You're either early or you're late, and that is part of discipline. And
Mm,
often that's not to say I'm never late for meetings. Of course I am. Things happen. Things happen, and sometimes I run late. But I think having that mindset of not trying to aim to be on time, because there's no such thing, kind of makes you up your standard. So then you're early, so you're a step ahead. Um, so I think that sort of mindset is really important. And with the discipline, it can be such simple things, but it doesn't mean it's easy. I gave up alcohol last Christmas, and not this Christmas we've just had, but the one before that. So that's been, you know 12 and a half months since I've had a drink. And I'd done it for a month at a time before. One time I did 3 months. And once you get past the first few months, even once you get past dry January or 3 months at the beginning of the
mm,
year, um I think for me it then becomes a mental challenge of, am I disciplined enough to keep doing this? And I think
mm-hmm.
that practice of that discipline in that one area, I think helps um, with trying to have high standards elsewhere.
Yeah.
I run a lot, and I've run marathons and ultra marathons and all the rest of it. And one of the reasons for going for ultra marathons beyond, just a regular marathon distance, which is, long enough, it was to have that mental discipline. And one of the
Mm,
first really long ones I did, um, was up in the north. And you all start at the same point, or the marathon people and the marathon people and the ultra marathon people start at the same point, and they do the route, and then they get to the end of the 26 miles, and there's a sign that says marathon runners this way, ultra marathon runners that way. And even
that's
if
the
you
moment when you start regretting it, right? You're like,
ah
oh man.
but I mean, it is such a moment though, and I remember it so well, because I got to that point. And even if you've signed up for the ultra category, you can still just duck in and do the marathon route,
Ah, oh,
and
yeah, of
you'll
course.
get a marathon medal. So it's like really tempting there. There's no one, and there's nothing to stop you, ducking in the marathon, getting the marathon medal, and then go and have a cup of tea, and you're done. But just at that fork where you have to make the decision, and you have to say, no, I'm going to do the ultra, and you turn right. As soon as I took a couple of steps that way, I felt amazing. But my god,
Mm,
it took a bit of, oh gosh, I'm going to have to dig deep for these next 10 miles going this way. And it was brutal. But I think even those, that simple decision of take a few steps that
yeah.
way, kind of reinforces that discipline. And I think it's great.
I think that's so powerful because one thing that I noticed with myself, at least, is when you make those kind of things, two things happen. One is you have that proof that you're able to be disciplined, right? It's like, well, I've done this thing and it was really hard. So I know that I can do it. And I think you also, it becomes a part of your identity, or at least it did for me.
Mhm.
I think I'm naturally quite lucky. It's quite in my nature to be disciplined, but a big difference. It made a big difference for me when I realized that, because as when I was much younger, I was not really aware of it. I was, you just do your things, right? You're
Yeah.
just yourself, and then at some point you realize, oh, I'm actually more disciplined than an average person, let's say. And that's when it became really powerful for me, because that's when it became part of my identity. And it's like, I am the disciplined person, so I
Yeah.
know that I can do that, and I know that I can leverage that in in all situations, right, across my life.
Yeah.
And
No,
I
it's
think that's when
important,
it
and I
becomes
think
really
it's
powerful.
yeah, it's good to have that. It's good to recognize that. Um, and I think in doing that, it also makes you realize what you're not disciplined in. I'm hopeless at loads of things, and
Mm,
that's fine
mm,
because I want to take some things extremely seriously, but I
yeah,
can't take everything extremely
yeah, yeah,
seriously.
yeah.
So it's almost being deliberately disciplined in a small number of areas, and that helps. That helps with work, that helps with life, that helps hopefully bring more success. But that comes with the knowledge of being completely hopeless in a bunch of other
Mm.
areas. But that's okay.
And you can certainly train yourself, as you mentioned before, right? You can, there's all sorts of tricks. And one thing is even accountability that we mentioned before, right? You said about how you have you want to write a post every week, and
Yeah.
because of that, you say the title of the post, or whatever it is, starts with 1 out of 52, 2 out of 50,
Mm.
52, 3 out of 52. So there's a bit of accountability there, and I use accountability all the time whenever I can.
Mhm.
With my team, I'll just say, look, I'm going to do this thing by tomorrow morning, and then I have to do it by tomorrow morning because I promised, right? So I can't not do it. And I'm even so one thing that I do sometimes is I schedule emails, or I send emails in advance. And I'll be like, look, this is already done. It's not done yet, but it has to be done by the time that person is going to wake up or get the
And
email,
read the
right?
email.
So,
Oh, brilliant. That's a
yeah.
good one.
So then, I have no excuse. I just have to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's, there are ways, there are tricks you can play on yourself to also build that discipline or gamify it for you, or maybe just leverage other tools so that you don't necessarily need that discipline muscle as much. You can use other
Yeah,
tools,
or you
right?
need it in the right areas. Like, over the last certainly 6 months, probably year or so, I've tried to slim down on what I do. So I want to do fewer and fewer things. Um, but I want to do those few things really, really well. And I think often if you're struggling with what to do or what to pursue, well, choose fewer things, but in those, in that thing, raise your standards. And that takes a lot of discipline, but that shows that, okay, in these few things, I'm going to try and be the best in the world. And it's quite a narrow focus, but I want to be the best at it. So therefore, all the other stuff, you've got to be
Mm-hmm.
comfortable with actually that you might let that slide. You might have to
Yeah.
say no to all those things that look interesting and exciting and all the rest of it. But you just got to let that go because the cost of wanting to be successful and wanting to be focused and disciplined on a small number of things means you're not going to do it across everything. So you've got to
Mm.
make a decision to let that stuff go, and that in itself takes discipline. But
Oh
it's
yeah,
it's it's a good thing to do to raise those standards.
that's like saying no, especially if you have a bit of a shiny object syndrome, which many of us do.
Yeah,
um
exactly. Founders like starting things,
yeah,
so there are lots of interesting shiny objects. Oh, I could start this. I could start that. I could, read about this, read about that. It's really hard.
lots of temptations. um how do I get comfortable being uncomfortable? So that's another question in the book, which is also, we've touched on that a little bit, because I think a lot of the questions are a bit connected to each other, right? So you need to be
Mm,
uncomfortable. You need, yeah, you need to be uncomfortable to get to put yourself out there, and so on and so forth. So there's some connectivity there. But there's one sentence that you wrote in a book that I would like to read, or maybe it's like parts of the sentence. You say, at school, you're looking for answers that are 100% right, but this is not a good parallel for life as a founder, or maybe real life at all. I think that's a pretty interesting realization for somebody who was really good at school. I was actually, I was really good at school. So I figured that out. I figured out how that works, and I played that game incredibly well. And I think it kicked me in the butt when I had to start living in the real life, because that's just not how it works. Because you realize that there are very rarely correct answers. There are only probabilities. Like, well, this is probably better than the other thing,
mm,
and in school it's not like that. In school it's, yeah, it's usually either it's a one or a zero, it's a true or a false, right? Most of the questions that you get, and most of the kind of thinking that you learn there is like that. And it took some time to adjust to real life or to life as a founder. And it you need to change how you make decisions, and it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable in those situations when you're looking for the 100% correct answer, but there is no 100%
Yeah.
correct answer, right?
Yeah. Well, there's something that might be helpful here is something we talk about in the section about trusting your gut, and this is helpful for this, I think. So in trusting your gut, for nine others, Katie and I have this completely arbitrary rule, and it's the 65% rule. And so we say if we're 65% sure, and how can you score these things? Well, you can't, but that's the kind of the point. But we sort of say, okay, well, if we're 65% sure that this person would be a good guest at nine others, or if we're 65% sure that we should, say yes rather than no, or whatever it is, then we go for it. And I think that's it, because you're never going to get 100%.
Mm,
And a lot of these situations are extremely uncomfortable. And we've learned over the years of hosting nine others that there are all these challenges, and there is never, there's never an obvious, oh yeah, we'll just do X. And if you do X, then you will get the answer to your prayers. It just doesn't happen. So there is always going to be a bit of discomfort and a bit of trade off and a price to pay. um, and I think the more you can, again, engineer, a bit like discipline, engineer situations in your life where you come across little bits of discomfort, then that can help when you have to have the really uncomfortable stuff come along.
100%. I had a rule for myself for a while that whenever something feels awkward, I just need to do it. Because there are a lot of things they're just slightly awkward, and because of that, you don't want to do them. And it's so
Mm.
powerful if you gamify that for yourself and say, well, if it's awkward, I'm just gonna do it. Because awkward is not wrong usually.
Hmm.
Awkward is just you're just uncomfortable doing it for whatever reason, right? Um,
And also,
and
again, like through nine others as well, we've seen so many people do so many amazing things, and none of the, there's some exceptional people doing crazy, crazy stuff, and none of it is impossible. It's all, back to your Steve Jobs example and different Jobs example. Everything we see is built by people like
mm,
us. So it's amazing to have
mm,
seen what some people have done, and they've done it. And we've had those examples, and we've met those people, and been inspired by them. So that kind of makes you think, well, if you want it enough, and you're willing to put in the work and pay the price, and yeah, be uncomfortable, and for it to take a bit of courage and all the rest of it. If you want it enough, if it, going back to the why, then it's completely possible.
yeah,
It's just a case of doing the work.
yeah. And it helps so much being around people who have done it, right? So what you were saying
Mm.
about nine others, that just changes your perspective so much.
Oh, massively,
if
massively.
if if you don't come from that kind of environment or that kind of family, or if you're not just naturally right like that, if you're not just naturally the kind of person who thinks that everything is possible and you can do everything, um, you certainly start realizing that when you meet people who have done it, and you
Mm.
realize that they don't have superpowers, right? They just decided to try, and
Yeah.
sometimes it just worked. And
And,
that's
and those, yeah, the people that do the amazing things, you sometimes think, oh yeah, yeah, you can come up with excuses or whatever. Oh, it's all right for them because of this, and this. Well, if they've done something exceptional, you can guarantee that the vast majority of that was uncomfortable, outside their comfort zone. Took a heck of a lot of courage and discipline and all the rest of it. It didn't come easy to the people who've become exceptional.
yeah, no. And that's yeah, that I think that's the beauty of it. People say don't meet your heroes, and I understand why they say that, because you're often disappointed, and that hero is not necessarily a hero of yours anymore. But I think that's a wrong way to look at it,
Mm.
because you shouldn't be disappointed. I think you should be empowered. It's like, well, they're actually not that special. So
Yeah.
how great is that? So that means you can
Yeah.
do it too.
Yeah, it's brilliant to meet your heroes, because you will realize that they are just ordinary
Yeah,
humans, with faults and fears and stresses like the rest of us.
yeah, exactly. Um, And that kind of brings us to one of the last questions in the book, which is who can help, right? It's you can't do it on your own. Everyone, nobody's self-made success. I think
Hmm.
pretty much everyone gets help from somewhere, or not just from somewhere, from a whole lot of different places, typically, right? Um, and obviously, I think you've approached that incredibly well with nine others, both surrounding yourself with incredible people, but also helping everyone else to surround themselves with other like-minded, smart,
Hmm.
inspiring, connected people who are doing cool stuff. Um, and I think it's really important. I talk about that on the podcast a lot as well, because I think it's important. I think I struggled with it in the past. I don't think I was naturally the kid who would just network with everyone or who just meet all the kids in school or whatever. But you can learn it, you can do it, and you can, go to events like nine others and be out there and just, but it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of proactivity, a
Yeah.
whole lot of work. And I also like to say that it's like many things in life, meeting people is also, it's kind of like sales or marketing. If you want, you need to call it 100 people and then three of them are going to buy. And with meeting people, it's very often the same. You need to meet 100 people and then three of them are going to change your life. But you have to go through the doing the work of meeting those 100 people, right?
Yes. Yeah, you wouldn't be able to identify the three immediately. And even if you did meet three, then maybe only one of those would turn it into something and the other two wouldn't. So yeah, there's always that
Mm.
balance. And it is something, I always keep saying, build your network before you really need it. You've got to put the
Hmm.
work in and meet people and go to events. And you know like in the early days of Nine Others, Katie and I were working with these investors, and actually before Nine Others started, we were working on a project, and we would be out at networking events 3, sometimes 4 nights a week after a day's work, and then we'd be in work again early the next day. And some of those networking events were terrible. They weren't a good fit for us. It didn't work. Some of them, I mean, I've had to work on it as well to go and network. So some of them, I'd go into and I'd feel really uncomfortable and I'd walk out, and then sometimes I'd, have a word with myself and go back in, or other times it would be like, oh no, I'm just not in the right zone. It'll be pointless. So I'll disappear. And then others, you have just the best time and you make some amazing connections, often to people you meet on the way out after a couple of hours. But you've got to keep going to these things again and again. And if you keep going to such a variety of events, then you get to know the ones that work for you. And you might get to know other people that go regularly. And then you might get to know the organizer of the event. And then you might be able to help out and, contribute and help organize some of these
Yeah,
events. And then you get to be the connector.
yeah,
And then you're, introduced to even more people, and then you find your groove. And it takes a long time, and that's why, it needs a bit of effort. um, and you've got to contribute for a long, long time. And we had this with Nine Others. Again, like we spoke about before, at the very worst, we'll host a dinner with some interesting people. But if we keep
exactly.
if we keep doing that, then a couple of things will definitely happen. Like one, some of the people that we connect and introduce and come to Nine Others will do a deal or collaborate or do whatever, and that'll go off and that'll be successful, and we'll have nothing more to do with it. We'll never see, we'll never sort of get any reward from that, and we never really want anything from that. It was just we just wanted to create this environment where people could help each other. But we just intuitively thought from the beginning, if we keep doing that, then it would be a bit weird if nothing ever, after years, ever came back to us.
Yeah,
I mean, that's not why we're doing it, and you do things without any expectation of getting anything in return. But yeah, you keep doing that, and course opportunities come back to us. And
yeah.
Nine Others drives everything that I do now. Um, as we've as I said, I'll hopefully do it forever, whichever way it goes. Um, yeah, so it's great. It's great.
I think that's a very good way of looking at it, right? You just try to help others in whatever way you can, right? Figure out what are the ways that you can. One thing I love to do is I find something interesting, could be an interesting book, article, course, whatever it is, and I send it to people who might benefit from it. And that's, look, maybe they don't appreciate it, maybe they do. I don't know, but I know that I appreciate what somebody's, not always, but sometimes
Yeah.
somebody's going to send me something really useful. I'm like, oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that, right?
Yeah.
Or even book notes, right? I share book notes.
Hmm.
When I read a book, so I usually read on a Kindle and I make highlights and I always move that to my Google Drive anyway, because it's from myself. And I share those kind of things with people, or I don't know, documents and frameworks and stuff that we create or that I create for the business or for my life or whatever. Just share those kind of things. Hey, this might be useful for you.
Hmm.
And then introductions are such an easy thing.
Hmm.
Probably maybe early in your career, introductions are not easy because you don't have anyone to introduce yet, but later on, it becomes easier and easier. It's all the kind of things that you can just do, connect people together, and with no expectations, as you said. Because two things: first, if you have high expectations, you're always going to be disappointed, because very often nothing's going to happen. Second of all, I think you should just enjoy doing it,
Yeah.
not just doing it for the sake of getting something in return, because then you're
Yeah.
going to hate it, right?
Yeah.
um and then, yeah, eventually some things start coming back to you. And it's I think it's just pleasant helping others, isn't it? Like, you do something that's hopefully going to helpful for you do something that's hopefully going to be helpful for someone. How great is that?
Yeah. It's just such a such a low cost thing to be generous, and
Yeah.
it makes other people be generous as well if you keep doing it. Um, it's gonna result in some great things. I mean, a bit like starting a company is going to get extremely difficult, like we talked about at the beginning. So you've got to have a deeper purpose behind it. If you are default generous, well, one of the guaranteed results is downside. Eventually somebody might take advantage of that,
Yeah.
and you'll get stung. Um, and that's happened to me. But that doesn't stop me trying to be a net positive, because if you keep sharing things, or you express gratitude, or you write to people and say thank you for doing such and such, thank you for that talk, thanks for writing that book, thanks for you know all sorts of things, you keep doing that, then yeah, eventually someone that might inspire someone else to do the same. So it's all a net positive.
Yeah, I do believe so as well. Yeah. Good. There are more questions in the book. I think we covered maybe half of them. We don't have time to go through all of them, so I'm afraid you're just gonna have to get the book to figure all the others. Um, it's where can people find it? On Amazon?
So you can search on Amazon, find your nine others. It's available in Waterstones, foils, things like that in the UK. But yeah, Amazon, or write to me if you want a signed copy. I've got some of them.
Cool, nice. Well, we're gonna link to the Amazon page on the show notes, as well as to your Twitter, LinkedIn profile, so people can find you. And I think that's it. Is there anything else we should talk about?
No, I think that's great. That's been a good conversation. Nice to see you again. I hope that's helped some people. But I think the strong thing is, the thing that has resonated with me is to keep thinking about why you're doing what you're doing.
Mm,
Have some discipline in a small number of areas, and yeah, just be generous, because it's such a nice thing to do, and it's quite infectious.
perfect. Yeah, I think it's a great 10 questions to go through for to learn about yourself and to make a bit of a almost like a strategic plan of how you're going to conquer this startup game. So, highly recommend it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening until the end. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like the content, please do me a favor and click the like button on YouTube, or give us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. Leave a comment, subscribe if you want to hear more from us. That really helps also to get the podcast out there, and that helps me get more interesting guests and create even more interesting content. So I really appreciate if you do that. If you have any other comments, questions, feel free to message me. You can find me on Twitter. That's usually the best channel. The link should be somewhere in the description. And yeah, check out my Twitter. I try to tweet interesting stuff about similar content that we talk about on the podcast. key insights from the podcast as well, and just generally stuff that I learn and stuff that I do. So see you. Thanks.